When Officer Karen, fueled by racism, stopped a black man, she never expected that he was actually the head of internal affairs. Some memories never fade. They linger like ghosts, haunting the corners of our minds when we least expect it. For Nathan Coleman, that memory was of sirens, flashing lights, and the metallic taste of fear. At 43, Nathan had built a life defined by precision and control. As the head trauma surgeon at Mercy General Hospital in Boston, she was accustomed to making split-second decisions that determined whether someone lived or died. Her colleagues respected her unwavering focus and steady hands, even as they whispered about her emotional detachment. Her patients knew her only as the brilliant doctor who saved lives with clinical efficiency, never seeing the fortress she had constructed around herself. Eleanor's appearance reflected this carefully constructed persona. His dark hair was always neatly groomed, not a strand out of place. Her wardrobe consisted of impeccably tailored pantsuits in muted colors, armor against the chaos of the emergency room. The only hint of softness was found in her eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber that occasionally betrayed the humanity she tried so hard to suppress. On a crisp autumn morning, Eleanor stood at the window of her corner office, watching leaves spiral down to the pavement below. Boston's skyline stretched before her, bathed in golden light. From this height, everything seemed orderly and predictable, exactly how she preferred her world to be. But the tranquility was shattered by a knock at her door. "Dr. Winters?" Her assistant's voice was hesitant. "There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." Eleanor turned, irritation flickering across her features. "I have surgery in an hour, Maria. Tell him to schedule properly," he says. Maria paused, clearly uncomfortable. "He says he's Officer Rebecca Hastings, and it's about what happened in Providence." The room seemed to tilt, and Eleanor's carefully constructed composure cracked. No one had mentioned Providence to her in 15 years. No one who knew was still in her life. "Send him in," she said, her voice suddenly hoarse. The man who entered was not what Eleanor expected. Mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. His posture suggested military background, but there was a gentleness to his movements that contradicted the hardness in his gaze. "Mr. Coleman," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me." Eleanor didn't take it. Providence is ancient history, detective. What could possibly warrant this intrusion? Hastings's hand fell to his side, but his gaze remained steady. "The case has been reopened. New evidence has surfaced." He paused, studying her reaction. "And you're the only surviving witness." The world around Eleanor seemed to fade, as memories surged forward like a tide she could no longer hold back. The life she had so carefully constructed was about to collapse, and there wasn't a surgical procedure in the world that could fix what was coming. Detective Rebecca Sullivan had spent 20 years in law enforcement chasing ghosts, cold cases that haunted the system and the families left behind. But the Providence Hospital fire of 2009 wasn't just another file on his desk. It was personal. "I need to understand what happened that night," Sullivan said, settling into the chair across from Eleanor. "The official report doesn't match the new evidence." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. 15 years is a long time, detective. Memories fade. "Not these kinds of memories," Sullivan responded, his voice soft but insistent. "Not the kind that change who you are." Something in his tone made Eleanor look up. There was knowledge there, too much knowledge for comfort. "What exactly do you want from me?" Sullivan placed a file on her desk and slid it toward her. 3 people died in that fire. The investigation concluded it was an accident, faulty wiring in the east wing of the psychiatric ward. But this, he tapped the folder, suggests otherwise. Eleanor didn't touch the file. "I was a first-year resident. I barely knew my way around the hospital. Yet you were the one who pulled the fire alarm. You were the one who led 6 patients to safety." Sullivan leaned forward. "And you were the one who went back in for Dr. James Harrington." The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. James. Brilliant, compassionate James, who had taken her under his wing. James, whose research into experimental treatments for severe PTSD had been groundbreaking. James, whose secrets had cost him everything. I couldn't save him, Eleanor said, the words hollow in her chest. But you tried. Why go back for just him? Why risk your life? Eleanor's gaze hardened. I was doing my job. Sullivan's expression remained unchanged. The night before the fire, you accessed Dr. Harrington's private research files. Care to explain that? The accusation hung in the air between them. Eleanor stood abruptly, moving to the window. I think you should leave, Detective. I can't do that, Dr. Winters. Not when someone has started replicating Harrington's experiments. Eleanor froze. That's impossible. All his research was destroyed in the fire. Not all of it, Sullivan said quietly. Someone has continued his work. And 3 days ago, a patient at Lakeside Psychiatric in Burlington exhibited the same symptoms as Harrington's final patient, the one who died with him in the fire. Eleanor turned slowly, her face pale. How do you know about that? Those records were sealed. Because I was there too, Eleanor. Sullivan's use of her first name jolted her. I was the officer who responded to your 911 call after you escaped the building. I was the one who had to hold you back when you tried to run back in a second time. Recognition dawned slowly. The young patrol officer who had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders as she sobbed in the parking lot. The one who had quietly disposed of the flash drive she'd pressed into his hand before the senior officers arrived. You know, she whispered. Sullivan nodded. I've known for 15 years. What I don't know is why you've been running ever since. Miles away in a rundown apartment in Somerville, Lily Chen stared at her laptop screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. At 28, Lily had the look of someone much older, dark circles under intelligent eyes, worry lines etched into her forehead, and a perpetual tension in her shoulders. As Harrington's last research assistant before the fire, she had spent years piecing together what remained of his work, driven by a promise and a guilt that never faded. On her screen, chemical compounds and neural pathway diagrams glowed in the dim light. Beside her laptop sat a small wooden box containing vials of amber liquid, the culmination of years of secret work. Her phone buzzed with a text message. They've found me. Time to implement Phase 2, contact the doctor. Lily's hand trembled as she closed the laptop. She had never met Dr. Winters, but she knew everything about her from Harrington's journals. The woman who had tried to stop him. The woman who had ultimately failed. I'm sorry, Lily whispered to no one in particular, but they need to know the truth. The tension in Eleanor's office was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Sullivan watched as she paced, her composure slipping with each pass by the window. Harrington wasn't just researching treatments, Eleanor finally said. He was developing a neuropharmaceutical compound that could access and potentially rewrite traumatic memories. Sullivan nodded. Memory reconsolidation therapy, but according to his published research, it was theoretical. The published research was a cover, Eleanor replied. The real work happened after hours, with a select group of patients who had experienced severe trauma. Combat veterans, assault survivors, people desperate enough to try anything. And it worked? Eleanor's laugh was bitter, too well. The compound didn't just access traumatic memories, it amplified them, brought them to life. Patients reported vivid hallucinations, reliving their worst moments as if they were happening again. That doesn't sound therapeutic, Sullivan observed. It wasn't meant to be, not initially. The goal was exposure, facing the trauma head-on to desensitize the response, but James found something unexpected. Eleanor stopped pacing. The patients who survived the treatment didn't just process their trauma. They emerged with heightened cognitive abilities, increased memory retention, improved pattern recognition, accelerated learning. It was as if the brain, forced to confront its darkest corners, rewired itself for optimization. Sullivan frowned. You're talking about human enhancement. I'm talking about a breakthrough that could have revolutionized treatment for PTSD, Alzheimer's, any condition involving memory dysfunction. Eleanor's voice rose with intensity, but only if the subject survived the process. And many didn't, Sullivan concluded. Eleanor nodded slowly. The final patient Patient X in the records was different. A former military operative with extensive psychological conditioning, James believed he would be the perfect candidate to withstand the full protocol. Her voice dropped. I found them together the night of the fire. Patient X was convulsing, screaming about shadows coming to life. James was trying to administer a counter-agent, but it was too late. You think Patient X started the fire? Eleanor shook her head. I know he did. I saw him break free, grab a lighter from James's desk, and set the curtains ablaze. He was trying to burn away what he was seeing. She closed her eyes, remembering. By the time I pulled the alarm, the fire had spread to the east wing. I got the other patients out, then went back for James. But you couldn't reach him, Sullivan finished. No, Eleanor whispered. The ceiling collapsed. I heard him screaming, and then nothing. The silence that followed was heavy, with unspoken implications. Finally, Sullivan spoke. So you took what research you could salvage and gave it to me for safekeeping. I was trying to protect everyone. The hospital, the patients' families, James's reputation. Eleanor met his gaze directly. What I want to know is how that research has resurfaced after all this time, and why you waited 15 years to come looking for me. Before Sullivan could answer, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dr. Winters, my name is Lily Chen. I was Dr. Harrington's assistant. We need to meet. Lives depend on it, including yours. Eleanor showed the message to Sullivan, whose expression darkened. That's our missing link, he said. Lily Chen disappeared 3 days after the fire. Everyone assumed she died, but no body was ever found. And you think she's been continuing James's work? Eleanor asked, incredulous. I think she's been waiting for the right moment, Sullivan replied, and something has forced her hand. Eleanor's response was cut short by her office phone ringing. She answered, listened for a moment, then hung up with a shaking hand. What is it? Sullivan asked. Emergency in the trauma unit, Eleanor said, already moving toward the door. Multiple victims from a building collapsed downtown. I have to go. Sullivan stood. I'm coming with you. Eleanor paused at the doorway. This isn't your jurisdiction, detective. This isn't about jurisdiction anymore, Sullivan replied grimly. This is about protecting you. If someone has Harrington's formula and knows you were involved, you're in danger. The words hung between them as Eleanor made her decision. Stay out of my way, she said finally. I have lives to save. As they rushed toward the trauma unit, neither noticed the petite woman with tired eyes watching from around the corner, a wooden box clutched tightly to her chest. The emergency room was chaos, stretchers being rushed through sliding, doors, nurses calling out vital signs, families crowding the waiting area. Eleanor moved through it all with practiced efficiency, assessing patients and barking orders. Sullivan stood back watching her work, struck by the transformation from the guarded woman in the office to this commanding presence in scrubs. Multiple crush injuries in Bay 2, a nurse called out. BP dropping, possible internal bleeding. Eleanor nodded, already moving. Prepor 3. I want a trauma series and cross-match for 4 units. She entered the trauma bay and froze. On the stretcher lay a young man, his face partially obscured by an oxygen mask. But Eleanor would recognize those eyes anywhere, the same stormy gray as the detective now standing behind her. This is James Harrington, the nurse said, checking the patient's wallet. 24 years old, construction worker, was inspecting the foundation when the collapse occurred. Eleanor's gaze shot to Michael Sullivan, whose face had drained of color. My son, he whispered. I didn't know he was working that site. The professional distance Eleanor had maintained for 15 years shattered in that moment. She saw not just another patient, but the connection between past and present, the terrible weight of consequences she had tried to outrun. Get him stabilized, she ordered the team, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I'll take him into surgery myself. As the team prepared James for transport, Eleanor turned to Michael. You need to tell me everything now. Why is your son involved in this? Sullivan's eyes never left his son's face. Ryan was recruited into a research program 6 months ago. He suffered a traumatic brain injury during his military service, an IED in Afghanistan. The program promised to help him recover his lost memories. He looked at Eleanor, anguish evident in his features. I tried to stop him when I realized who was behind it, but he wouldn't listen. That's why I finally came looking for you, not just because of the case, but because I needed someone who understood what we're dealing with. Eleanor felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her feet. The building that collapsed, it wasn't an accident, was it? It was the research facility, Sullivan confirmed, and I believe someone destroyed it intentionally. Before Eleanor could respond, alarms began blaring from Ryan's monitors. "He's crashing!" a nurse shouted. Eleanor was beside him instantly, her personal shock subsumed by professional instinct. "Push one of Epi and get me the crash cart." As she worked to stabilize Ryan, she caught sight of someone through the glass doors of the trauma bay, a petite woman with tired eyes watching intently. Their gazes locked for a brief moment before the woman disappeared into the crowd. Lily Chen had found her, and Eleanor knew with chilling certainty that this was just the beginning. 7 hours of surgery later, Eleanor emerged from the operating room, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Michael Sullivan stood from his chair in the waiting area, his expression a silent question. "He's stable," Eleanor said, removing his surgical cap. "The internal bleeding was extensive, but we managed to repair the damage. He's in recovery now." Sullivan's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't thank me yet," Eleanor replied quietly. "During surgery, I found something embedded near his brainstem, a small device, about the size of a grain of rice." Sullivan's relief vanished. "What kind of device?" "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it." Eleanor led him to a quiet corner of the waiting room. "But based on its location and the surgical scar indicating recent placement, I believe it's related to Harrington's research. A delivery mechanism for the compound, perhaps." "Did you remove it?" Eleanor shook her head. "It's too risky without knowing more. It's integrated with the surrounding tissue in a way that suggests removing it could cause catastrophic damage." She hesitated. "Michael, I need to know what your son told you about this research program. Anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with." Sullivan pulled out his phone, navigating to a series of text messages. "This is the last conversation we had before he stopped responding to my calls." Eleanor read through the exchange, her alarm growing with each message. Ryan had described a program called Phoenix Protocol that promised to heal traumatic brain injuries by reactivating dormant neural pathways. The treatment involved a series of injections and cognitive recalibration sessions that left him disoriented, but experiencing flashes of recovered memory. "The last session was different," Sullivan said, pointing to the final message. "He said they introduced something new, a compound that made his memories feel like they were happening in real time. He described it as living inside my own head while watching from the outside." Eleanor's blood ran cold. That's consistent with the effects of Harrington's formula, but he never developed an implantable delivery system. "Someone has advanced his research," Sullivan concluded grimly. "We need to find Lily Chen," Eleanor said. "She's the missing piece." As if summoned by her name, Eleanor's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Roof now, come alone or people will die." Eleanor showed Sullivan the message. "It's a trap," he said immediately. "You can't go." "I don't have a choice," Eleanor replied. "She's the only one who knows what was done to your son." Sullivan grabbed her arm. "Then I'm coming with you." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "So you need to stay with Ryan. If he wakes up, he might tell you something that could help us. And if something happens to me..." She trailed off, the implication clear. Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Sullivan released her arm. 20 minutes. If you're not back, I'm coming after you with backup." Eleanor nodded, then made her way to the service elevator that led to the roof. As the doors closed, she felt a strange sense of inevitability, as if 15 years of running had always been leading her back to this moment of confrontation. The hospital roof was bathed in the golden light of sunset, the Boston skyline a glittering backdrop against darkening skies. Lily Chen stood near the edge, the wooden box from earlier clutched in her hands. Up close, Eleanor could see the resemblance to the young researcher she'd glimpsed in Harrington's lab, the same determined set to her jaw, the same intensity in her gaze. "Dr. Winters," Lily said, her voice surprisingly steady, "after all these years." "You've been busy," Eleanor replied, keeping her distance. "Continuing work that should have died in that fire." "Is that what you think?" Lily asked, a bitter smile playing at her lips. "That I've been carrying on Harrington's mad science experiment?" "The evidence points that way," Eleanor said. "Sullivan's son has an implant. The building collapse. The patient at Lakeside with symptoms matching Harrington's final subject." Lily laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've only seen what they wanted you to see." She opened the wooden box, revealing 6 vials of amber liquid. "This isn't Harrington's formula. It's the counteragent." Eleanor's confusion must have shown on her face because Lily continued, her words tumbling out urgently. "James wasn't the monster you think he was. When he realized what his research could do in the wrong hands, he developed a neutralizing agent. The night of the fire, he was trying to administer it to patient X, but it was too late." "If that's true, why didn't he destroy his research?" Eleanor challenged. "Why risk it falling into the wrong hands?" "Because he believed in its potential to help people," Lily replied, "and he trusted you to protect it." She stepped closer. "The flash drive you saved, it didn't contain the formula for the compound. It contained the research on the counteragent." Eleanor felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting. "Then who has the original research?" Lily's expression darkened. "The same people who funded it in the first place. A private military contractor called Nexus Operations. They've been developing it as a chemical weapon, disguised as a therapeutic breakthrough." "And the building collapse?" "Their main research facility," Lily confirmed. "I've been working undercover there for years, trying to perfect the counteragent while gathering evidence of their program. When they discovered I'd smuggled out the counteragent, they tried to eliminate all traces of their work, including their test subjects." "Like Ryan Sullivan," Eleanor said, the pieces finally clicking into place. Lily nodded. "And dozens more. The implants allow for remote administration of the compound. They could trigger a mass psychotic event with the push of a button." "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Because you're the only one who can help me stop them," Lily replied, holding out the box. "These 6 doses are all that's left of the counteragent. We need to synthesize more, and you're the only other person alive who understands Harrington's original research." Eleanor stared at the vials, the weight of responsibility bearing down on her. "If what you're saying is true, we need to alert authorities, get these implants removed." "It's not that simple," Lily cut in. "The implants are designed with a failsafe. Any attempt at removal triggers the compound's release, and Nexus has operatives everywhere, including in law enforcement." Before Eleanor could respond, the door to the roof burst open. Michael Sullivan emerged, gun drawn, his expression grim. "Step away from her, Dr. Winters." Eleanor turned, confusion giving way to horror as she saw the cold calculation in his eyes, so different from the anguish she'd witnessed earlier. "Michael?" "I'm afraid Detective Sullivan isn't who he claims to be," Lily said quietly. "Nexus recruited him years ago to monitor the aftermath of the Providence incident." Sullivan's mouth curved into a humorless smile. "Smart girl. Always were too clever for your own good, Chen." "The building collapse," Eleanor said, realization dawning. "Your son, Ryan, is a convenient cover," Sullivan replied. "Though he is indeed one of our test subjects. Makes for a believable story, doesn't it? The concerned father seeking answers." Eleanor felt sick. "All this time you've been waiting for the right moment," Sullivan finished for her. "When Chen here went rogue, we needed to accelerate our timeline. You two finding each other was inevitable, so we decided to control the circumstances." He gestured with his gun. "Now I'll take that box and we can all walk out of here alive." Eleanor looked at Lily, who gave an imperceptible nod. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Two individuals connected by a 15-year-old tragedy, now united against its perpetrators. "James would be disappointed in you, Eleanor," Sullivan said, stepping closer. He always said you were the bravest person he knew, yet you've spent 15 years running from what happened. I wasn't running from what happened, Eleanor replied, her voice finding strength. I was running from what I did. With a sudden movement, she grabbed the box from Lily's hands and sprinted toward the edge of the roof. Sullivan fired, the bullet grazing Eleanor's arm, but she didn't stop. At the last moment, she turned and hurled the box over the edge, watching as it disappeared into the gathering darkness below. Sullivan's roar of rage was drowned out by the wail of approaching sirens. Lily had planned for this moment, Eleanor realized. The authorities were already on their way. It's over, Sullivan, Eleanor said, clutching his bleeding arm. Without those vials, Nexus has nothing. Sullivan's face contorted with fury. You think this ends here? The formula is already in production. Those vials were our only leverage. No, Lily said, stepping forward. Those vials were a decoy. The real counteragent is already being synthesized in labs across the country. Independent labs, outside Nexus's reach. She smiled grimly. I learned from the best how to hide research in plain sight. Sullivan's expression flickered between rage and calculation. With the sirens growing louder, he backed toward the door. This isn't over, he warned, for either of you. As he disappeared through the door, Eleanor turned to Lily. Was any of it true about Ryan, the other patients? All of it, Lily. Confirmed. But we have a chance to save them now. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small flash drive. Everything you need is here. Harrington's complete research, the counteragent formula, and evidence of Nexus's operations. Eleanor took the drive, 15 years of guilt and fear culminating in this moment of choice. Why me? After all this time, why trust me? Lily's eyes softened. Because James did. His last words, before the ceiling collapsed. He told me to find you. Eleanor will know what to do, he said, and now finally you can. The door to the roof burst open again, this time revealing actual police officers responding to Lily's anonymous tip. As they were escorted downstairs to give their statements, Eleanor felt a weight lifting, the weight of secrets, of running, of the past she had tried so hard to leave behind. The echoes of Providence would always be part of her, but for the first time in 15 years, they no longer defined her future. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the observation room of Mercy General's newly established neurological recovery unit, watching as Ryan Sullivan, the real Ryan, not a cover story, worked with a physical therapist on his coordination exercises. The removal of his implant had been successful thanks to the protocol she and Lily had developed using Harrington's research. Across the country, hundreds of other patients were undergoing similar procedures, freed from the shadow of Nexus's experiment. Michael Sullivan, the real detective, not the Nexus operative who had impersonated him, had been instrumental in building the case against the corporation. The investigation had revealed a web of corruption extending into multiple law enforcement agencies and government departments. The trials were ongoing, but the evidence was overwhelming. He's making remarkable progress, Lily said, joining Eleanor at the window. No longer haunted by exhaustion, she had become Eleanor's partner in developing therapeutic applications for Harrington's research, the way it was always meant to be used. They all are, Eleanor replied. The brain's capacity for healing still amazes me every day. James would be proud, Lily said softly, of both of us. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I spent so long running from what happened, I never considered that I might be running from who I was meant to become. Fear does that, Lily observed. It narrows our vision until all we can see is the path away from pain. And courage? Eleanor asked, turning to face her. Lily smiled. Courage expands it, shows us all the paths we could take, even the difficult ones. She gestured toward the patients in the recovery unit. This is your path, Eleanor. It always was. Eleanor's pager buzzed. Another patient arriving for assessment, another life to rebuild. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. I've been thinking about something James used to say, that memories don't define us. It's what we do with them that matters. Wise words, Lily agreed. I'm not running anymore, Eleanor said, a quiet determination in her voice. Whatever comes next, I'm facing it head on. As she walked through the halls of the hospital she had once used as a hiding place, Eleanor felt the weight of her past transform into something new, not a burden to carry, but a foundation to build upon. The echoes of Providence would always be with her, but now they resonated with purpose rather than fear. In the evening light streaming through the hospital windows, she caught a glimpse of her reflection, his appearance more relaxed and approachable, her posture open and confident. For the first time in 15 years, he recognized himself, not just the brilliant surgeon or the frightened witness, but the woman who had finally found the courage to stop running and start healing. The weight of echoes, she had learned, was not in their persistence, but in what they revealed about the person who carried them. And Eleanor's echoes now told a story not of tragedy and guilt, but of resilience, redemption, and the profound courage it takes to face one's own shadows. As she pushed through the doors to meet her new patient, Eleanor carried with her not just the lessons of the past, but the promise of all that was yet to come.